When I was asked to contribute tonight, I wasn't sure that I had anything relevant to offer. This isn't humility. As anyone that knows me will tell you, I have a pretty healthy sense of my own self-worth. I just don't think that my career has been especially innovative, and the most lessons I've learned I think are obvious, and I don't want to sound condescending. Whatever gifts or abilities I bring to this job, I've taken from others who have come before me. But the more I thought about it, the more relevant I felt my message could be. Yes, innovation is crucial in today's educational environment. We've all heard how society is different, and we can't prepare tomorrow's citizens using yesterday's approaches. And I commend educators for constantly pushing themselves to improve their practices. But I feel the need to stress that while this is a lofty goal and one that we should continually work towards, we must also remember that without one key component, no amount of innovation will matter, and that's what I want to talk about tonight. I was told to have some slides to represent some of my key ideas. Here's one. As a student, even as in grad school, this is how I felt. As a teacher, however, I'm the exact opposite. If anything, I go way overboard. One time, advisors at Metro build their advisee's schedule, and one time a colleague of mine says to me, he says, so we're doing schedules, and this kid asks about a class, US Humanities, what are you learning there? And this other kid goes, it's Ben's class, you learned about him. And I start getting kind of defensive, like, no, and the guy's like, it wasn't an insult. So here's a little bit about myself. As mentioned, I've been a teacher for 16 years, all of them in Cedar Rapids and all of them at Metro High School. My parents were both teachers. My father taught at my high school and my mother taught kindergarten one town over. My grandmother was a teacher. I never seriously considered any other career path. Well, for a while, I really wanted to be a professional driver on a closed course, doing car commercials. Teaching was my fallback. I am the product of a rural school district in Illinois, which had no alternative setting. In fact, the first encounter I had with the concept of alternative education was when a friend of mine called to invite me to interview for a year-long substitute position at Metro. This call came the Thursday before the first week of school, and all I knew then was that I needed a job, and so I jumped at the opportunity to interview. When I somewhat naively asked what I needed to have ready for the first day, they didn't say anything about curriculum. I was told just to be there, greeting the students with a smile. The rest we'd figure out. And I still carry that lesson today. In order to educate students, we must first build relationships with them. Or, as I was told in that first year, we have to reach them before we can teach them. There is no one reason a student attends Metro, but generally speaking, it's because something isn't right in their educational environment. It can be a small something or a big something they have control over or something that is controlling them. In order to help them work past this, we must first connect with them. Metro's strongest element is its advisor system. Each incoming student is fitted with a staff person who essentially serves as their counselor. They communicate with parents, build and change schedules, help with job applications, give rides to and from home or work, whatever that student needs. This level of connection can be intensely rewarding. To see a student achieve a success that they did not envision for themselves and to know that you had a small part in that success is why all teachers enter the profession. At Metro, we are often able to see these successes, these changes happen in real time, proof positive that our efforts have meaning. However, this level of connection can also be devastating. Not all students make it to graduation. Circumstances sometimes are too great to overcome. A kid you spent 2 years working with can leave the building one day and never come back. Life gets real. But despite this, and more accurately, I think because of this, our staff never gives up on our students, and we do our best to not let them give up on themselves. In my experience at Metro, the lessons that resonate the most with students have often little to do with curriculum, or rather, the curriculum becomes a means and not an end. I've never taught at any other building and don't want to sound like we're doing the better work or we're the only building focusing on building connections. I just know that many of the students I've worked with needed something larger than an appreciation of Shakespearean sonnets. They needed to be taught that they could learn that appreciation, that education was accessible to them, that they could improve themselves, that they are not the product of their pasts. But to get them to learn this, you must first build connections. You got to reach them to teach them. Here's a story my mom told me. A woman goes to the circus and goes to see the elephants. These are huge creatures, of course, but she notices that the collars they wear are chained to simple stakes barely pounded into the sand. Confused by this, she asks one of the workers, "Excuse me, but can't the elephants just pull those stakes out?" The man replies, "Yeah, but they don't know that." The woman says, "Well, what do you mean?" The man puts down his rake and says, "When they're young, we chain them with heavy chains and a big stake and we pound it in real deep. And they pull and they pull and they pull, but they can't get that stake to budge. So after a while, they just stop trying. And now when they're older, they don't try to pull anymore." Much of our work at Metro is teaching our students that they are not the same people they were when they were younger, that they can pull their stakes out now. What held them back is no longer a barrier, that their future is not defined by their past, that the obstacles holding them back are only in their minds. And this starts with the connections. You got to reach them to teach them. My father taught history and social studies. He told me once, and I'm pretty sure he cribbed this from some author or another, words to the effect of, you know, Benny, they probably won't remember who won the Battle of 1812 or the preamble to the Constitution, but they'll remember how being in my class made them feel. Students remember the connection you made with them. And this is as true as anything. Think about a teacher that you feel had a positive impact on your life. I'd be willing to bet that impact was not because they taught you the Pythagorean theorem or that the ribosome is the powerhouse of the cell. It's because of how they made you feel. So, how do you build connections? I wish I had a 5-point plan, a one-size-fits-all approach that guarantees you positive relationships that foster student success. All I can say is what I found to be helpful in my career, in my building. Most of it is by feel and trial and error. But here are some tips I've stolen from others and made mine. Number 1, be genuine. Kids are brilliant at discovering artifice. If you seem fake, they're instantly hesitant and will transfer that hesitancy on to the lessons you're trying to teach them. Number 2, get off task. This might be counterintuitive to some. How can I teach more effectively? Have you tried not teaching? But for me, it seems to have long-term benefits. It breaks up the lesson. It can be the spoonful of sugar. For example, one time in class, we were studying tone in nonfiction, and we had to read an essay about the impossibility of time travel. And so we got off on the tangent of, if you could go back in time, what would you do? And this isn't really relevant or anything, but I let it go. And then one kid said that if he could go back in time, he'd go and punch himself. And as soon as he finishes this, I'm sitting on this table, and I'm like, cool, cool. And I'm turning to the door, and in walks some guy I'd never seen before. And in that instant, I was positive that guy was me from the future, come back to punch myself in the face. I mean, he was just coming to fix the fan, but if you were going to go back in time to punch yourself, that would have been the perfect time. Where was I? Oh, yeah, number 3. Compliment their shoes. Kids love shoes. Number 4, treat them with respect even when they act disrespectfully. Anytime I find myself talking down to a student, I know I've lost them. I found Instagram a couple years ago, and I don't really use it to do anything other than follow memes. So this was my introduction to class this year. Number 5, use their language. Maybe it's because I'm an English teacher, or maybe it's because I'm afraid of being sneak dissed, but my ears are always listening for the new slang being tossed around. And the look on a kid's face when they hear an adult using their language is a mixture of irritation and validation. But note, this can sometimes backfire. Number 6, be yourself, no matter how nerdy. Share yourself. You've heard the expression, dance like nobody's watching. I usually teach like nobody's watching. I humiliate myself in front of my students on a daily basis. I say things in front of those kids that I would never say anywhere else. Simply by being in my class, engaging with the material, I am asking them to be vulnerable, to share their ideas and themselves. If I don't model this vulnerability, I can't expect them to. When I was student teaching, I had the good fortune of being placed with Jason Alberti at Washington, and he illustrated this concept perfectly. Every day I watched this excitable little man literally bouncing off the floor with enthusiasm, and I saw how it pulled kids into class. Finally, number 7, listen. Harder than it sounds, especially for teachers, a group known for their loquaciousness. There's a note on my computer that just says, listen. If you want to connect with the kid, listen to them, let them talk. But don't let me sound like I'm bragging or that I'm claiming we at Metro have a unique excellence not seen in other schools. I'd say it's the opposite. All teachers endeavor to reach their students. We at Metro are blessed with increased opportunities to build these connections, as well as the increased challenges that support many of our students bring to the table. And I want to acknowledge that the support that our district has given us that allows us these opportunities. And the Optimist Club, Metro North Rotary, Cedar Rapids Foundation are always excited to support our programs as well. The Jane Boyd Center allows us access to the gymnasium for volleyball and basketball, and without these resources, we would not be able to do our jobs as well. But it's hard, people, it's hard. Every year it feels like staffs get smaller and classes get bigger. We as educators try our best to do more with less, and the issues our students come to us with seem to be more intense every year. And for every kid that I feel a genuine connection with, I know there's at least one more who I missed. The reality is no matter how hard you try, there are some kids who may never pick up what you're putting down, who come in hating school and go out the exact same way. And you're only human. The more you seek to connect with kids, the more you'll hear things that you can't unhear. Their problems and issues and challenges become yours, and believe me, it's easy to become calloused over. How many times can your heart break for a child before you stop reaching out? But what I've learned, and one of the hardest lessons, is that you can't let that fear of failure stop you from trying. Permission to fail. Permission to have an off day where you just aren't on your best game. I've been doing this job in this building for 16 years, over a decade and a half, and this was the first year that I wasn't stoked to come back from summer break. As summer dwindled away and the call of the cicadas announced the coming school year, rather than anxious, I just felt burned out. And then on the second day of pre-service, I got an email from a former student that reminded me why I need to do this job, why I love this job, why I love my building, and why connecting with students matters so much. I won't tell her whole story, but to suffice it to say, she came to Metro with some significant barriers to her education, past events and present challenges. Her first year at Metro was my first year teaching in 2003. At the time, I wasn't fully aware of her biography. I just remember how impressively and quietly intelligent she was. She went on to graduate high school, then Kirkwood, then the University of Iowa with a degree in cognitive research sciences. We stay in touch through the years. She adopts one of my cats. And then 8 years ago, she sends me an email, which I still have. She wants to go back to school to be an English teacher, and so she does. She gets her license and a job teaching middle school language arts. And this year, she sends me an email with a copy of a presentation she gave in front of her colleagues. This will sound like I'm bragging, but I'm not. But the point is that she says in her speech, it was my belief in her that pushed her to complete high school. The connection I was able to form with her and the fact that she was willing to take a chance on me allowed her to find the strength she needed to pull that stake out of the sand. I remember this was my first year. At that point, I didn't know much about teaching or the importance of building connections with students or helping them overcome their past. I was in pure survival mode, just desperate not to fail. And now she was telling a room full of her colleagues that they needed to do the same thing for their students that I did for her. And it reminded me at a time that I needed it that the power of connection is impossible to grasp. Innovation is important. We must constantly reflect on our teaching practices and approaches and have the humility to admit that we will never be done learning how to teach. But if I had control and was tasked with the challenge of improving education at the district, state, or national level, I would get smaller classes, more teachers, and more caring adults in schools. After all, before we can teach them, we have to reach them.